G'day history lovers, it's me, Random History, and today we're going to be discussing the downfall of the Anglo-Saxon kings of England. It's going to be a two-part series as I really want to get all the details possible in here, so today I'm just going to be covering the events leading up to the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and I'm going to be leaving the rest of it, like the battles and the actual fall of the Anglo-Saxon kings, in another video that should be coming out in the next few days. So if you guys are only really interested in the warfare or stuff like that, feel free to skip that video. Like I said, it should be coming out within the next few days or so. Well, yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, before we can talk about their downfall, I think it's important I give you a brief summary on how the Anglo-Saxons came to prominence to begin with in England. Anglo-Saxons is a name used to refer to the multiple Germanic tribes that invaded and conquered England following the departure of the Romans from the island. The main tribes involved include the Jutes, the Saxons, and the Angles, which is actually where the name England comes from, originally being Angleland, that evolved into England. Just a side note as well, these weren't likely the only Germanic tribes that conquered, they were just the main ones. The first contact between the Anglo-Saxons and Britain was around the beginning of the 4th century, with many Anglo-Saxons seeking glory and wealth by raiding the coastline of England. However, they would always be beaten back by the Romans until eventually the Romans abandoned England in the early 5th century, which gave the ever-ambitious Anglo-Saxons their chance to conquer England from the Romanized Britons, a people who they saw as weak without Roman assistance. By 450, the Anglo-Saxons controlled a vast amount of land in the British Isles, as more and more of their kinsmen sailed in from their homeland. It is for this reason that the year 450 is regarded as the beginning of Anglo-Saxon England. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm going to be skipping about 600 years of Anglo-Saxon England here, as this video is about their downfall, not their entire history. However, I would be more than happy to make a video covering that 600 years, so if that's something you'd like to see, leave it in the comments below. Now, let's get into their downfall, shall we? Edward the Confessor, the man who would eventually become one of the, if not the leading cause for the downfall of the Anglo-Saxon kings, was born between 1003 and 1005 in Islip, Oxfordshire, to the then King of England Aethelred the Unready and his second wife Emma of Normandy. He had two younger full siblings, a brother Alfred and a sister Godgifu. Notice how I emphasised the full there. Yeah, that's because he had about 7 half-siblings from his father's first marriage, most notably Edmund Ironside and Eardwick. During the time of Edward's childhood, his father's throne was seized by Svein Forkbeard and his son Canute in 1013. It's important to note that they were Vikings, Danes to be more specific, and that will become important later on. Following the siege of his father's throne, Edward, along with his mother and siblings, fled to Normandy, with their father following soon after. Svein, the Viking King of England, died in February 1014, and leading Englishmen invited Aethelred back under the condition he promised to rule more justly than his last tenure as king, a proposal to which Aethelred eagerly agreed. He didn't get to enjoy his newly reacquired title for long, however, as he died in April 1016 and was succeeded by Edward's older half-brother, Edmund Ironside. Edmund would continue the fight against Svein's son, Canute, who apparently wasn't happy with the Anglo-Saxons being back in rule and wished to follow in his father's footsteps. On the 18th of October 1016, English forces led by Edmund attacked the Danes as they retired towards their ships in either Ashington in the southeast or Ashton in the northwest of Essex. In the subsequent battle that would come to be known as the Battle of Assendon, the Danes won a decisive victory, possibly due to Edmund being abandoned by a large part of his forces led by Eadric Striona. After their resounding defeat, Edmund fled westwards with Canute in hot pursuit, with another battle most likely being fought near the forest of Dean in western Gloucestershire. On an island near Deerhurst, Canute and Edmund, who had been wounded, met to negotiate terms of peace. They came to the agreement that all of England north of the Thames would be ruled by Canute, whilst all the land south of the river would remain under English control along with London, as well as that the entire realm would pass on to Canute upon Edmund's death. Edward would die just weeks after the arrangement on the 30th of November 1016. It is unclear what caused his death, however theories range from he was murdered, possibly by Canute so he could seize control, to that it was from wounds he received in battle or by some unknown disease. Whatever the cause of his death, Canute was crowned as King of England in London 1017, and Edward again went into exile with his brother and sister. However, in that same year, his mother actually married Canute, and also in that same year, Canute had Edward's last surviving elder half-brother, Eardwick, executed, leaving Edward the heir to the Anglo-Saxon lineage, so a pretty eventful year. Edward would remain in Normandy with his mother's brother for the next 20 years, and whilst he had maintained aspirations of reclaiming his throne, it seemed very unlikely, mainly due to the fact that his ambitious mother much favoured her son with the current king, Canute, Hardrada, over the son of a dead king. However, there was actually an attempt made by his cousin, Robert I of Normandy, to invade England and place him on the throne in 1034. However, it was stopped by harsh winds which scattered or sank much of the fleet, which resulted in Robert postponing his decision. Back in England, Canute would die in 1035, and his son Harthacnut succeeded him as King of Denmark. It is unclear whether he intended to keep England under his rule as well, but he was too busy defending his position in Denmark to assert his claim to the English throne. So instead it was decided that his elder half-brother, Harold Hereford, who was a son from Canute's previous marriage, would reign as regent whilst Emma held Wessex on Harthacnut's behalf. In 1036, Edward and his brother Alfred separately came to England due to an apparent invitation their mother had sent them to visit her. She would later claim that the letter was forged by Harold, however historians disagree and believe it was her who sent it in an attempt to counter Harold's growing popularity. Alfred would end up being captured by Godwin, Earl of Wessex. Remember him, he's going to be important later on as well, who turned him over to Harold Harefoot, who had him blinded by forcing red-hot pokers into his eyes, therefore making him unsuitable for kingship. He would die soon after as a result of his wounds. The killing of his brother is thought to be the source of much of Edward's hatred for Godwin, and one of the primary reasons Godwin was banished in autumn 1051 during Edward's reign. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves just yet. After the murder of his brother, Edward fought a successful skirmish near Southampton before promptly retreating back to Normandy. Harold Harefoot would be crowned King of England in 1037, betraying his brother, and expelled Emma the following year, where she subsequently fled to Bruges, Belgium. Following her expulsion, Emma called on her son Edward and demanded his help to secure the throne for Harthacnut. Edward would refuse his mother's demands as he had no resources to launch an invasion and disclaimed any interest to see himself on the throne. Luckily for Harthacnut, Harold Harefoot died in 1040 and he was able to secure the English throne without any resistance. Unluckily for Harthacnut, however, was that he had been suffering bouts of illness leading up to his crowning as the King of England and may had suffered from tuberculosis. Perhaps sensing he didn't have much time left, he invited his half-brother Edward back to England and most likely named him heir, perhaps being influenced by his mother. Regardless of whether or not he named Edward as his heir, he would die on the 8th of June 1042 and Edward would succeed him as King of England. It appears his early rule was no easy feat, as most of the loyalty to the old Anglo-Saxon kings had eroded by the time he had claimed his birthright. Only one earl, Leofric, the Earl of Mercia, was descended from a family who had served Edward's father, Aethelred. Although Godwin, yes, the same one who murdered his brother, was English, he was one of Canute's men and was married to Canute's former sister-in-law. In his early years, it seems Edward managed to restore much of the loyalty to the old Anglo-Saxon lineage and his reign stabilised. In 1051, however, the clergy and monks of Canterbury elected a relative of Godwin as Archbishop of Canterbury. But Edward, most likely due to his hatred for Godwin for, killing his brother, rejected him and appointed Robert of Jumièges, sorry, that's really hard to pronounce, who claimed Godwin was in illegal possession of some archiepiscopal estates. In September 1051, Edward was visited by his brother-in-law, Godgifu's second husband, Eustace II of Boulogne. His men would end up getting into some fights in Dover, and in response, Edward ordered Godwin, as Earl of Kent, to punish the town's inhabitants, but Godwin took their side and refused. Edward seized this chance to bring Godwin down a peg, considering he already hated him for, killing his brother. The now Archbishop Robert accused Godwin of plotting to kill the king, just as he had killed his brother Alfred. Leofric of Mercia and Siward of Northumbria, two of the most powerful earls of the time, decided to stay loyal to the king and called up their vassals. However, Godwin's two sons, Svein and Harold, called up their own vassals. Shortly after, Godwin's position disintegrated as his men weren't willing to fight the king. And after Edward sent a message to Godwin saying that Godwin could have peace if he could restore Alfred and his champions alive and well, he and his sons subsequently fled to Flanders and Ireland. Svein would end up going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and would actually end up dying on his way back, but Godwin and his other sons would return with an army a year later with considerable support. While Leofric and Siward failed to support the king this time, both sides were concerned that a civil war would leave the country open to foreign invasion. Due to this truth, the king, despite his anger and hatred towards Godwin, restored his and his son Harold's earldoms. I think I also forgot to mention that Edward was actually married to Godwin's daughter, Edith, and when all this shit happened, he ended up sending her to a nunnery, but upon a relative's return, she regained her position as queen. Godwin would end up dying in 1053 with his son Harold succeeding him. Siward would also die in 1055, and Harold's brother, Tostig, was appointed as Earl of Northumbria in his stead. Another one of Harold's brothers, Gurth, would also become the Earl of East Anglia upon the death of Aethelgar, and the fourth surviving Godwin brother, Leofwine, was also given an earldom in southeast England, which meant that now the Godwinsons controlled all of England subordinately apart from Mercia. It is not known whether or not Edward approved of this, or whether he merely accepted it, but from this time it seems he began to withdraw from active politics and began focusing mainly on hunting. Fast forward a few years, in October 1065, Harold's brother, Tostig, Earl of Northumbria, was hunting with the king when his thanes rebelled against his rule, claiming he was oppressive and killed some 200 of his followers. They nominated Morcar, brother of Edwin of Mercia, as Earl and invited the brothers to join them in marching south. The king and Tostig met up with Harold at Northampton, and Tostig accused Harold of conspiring with the rebels in front of the king. Tostig seemed to have been a favourite with the king and queen, who demanded that the revolt be suppressed, but neither Harold nor anyone else would fight to support Tostig, and Edward was forced to submit to Tostig's banishment. The humiliation from this may have caused a series of strokes which led to his death on the 5th of January 1066. Despite the rocky start to their relationship, it seems that towards the end of his life, Edward and Harold started getting along, as Edward began to see him as a good leader and a loyal man. It is for these reasons that most historians believe Edward named Harold as his heir. The dying king was also said to have famously pointed towards Harold on his deathbed. Regardless of whether or not Edward actually named him heir, although it seems likely he did, he was named king by the Witan and was crowned as king the following day. For those of you who didn't know, the Witan was a council made up of the most powerful men in England and were responsible for choosing the next king. So it wasn't exactly as easy as your father was king, so you're king back then in Anglo-Saxon England, although it pretty much always went that way. If you want me to do something more in depth on the Witan, just, leave me a comment and I will definitely get around to it. It is possible it was so rushed because they knew that William the Conqueror of Normandy was preparing an invasion of England to seize the throne that he himself had a claim to, due to the fact that Edward had promised him the throne in 1051, most likely due to the fact that he was a distant cousin of Edward's. Harold, who had also sworn in 1064 to uphold William's right to succeed to the throne, was therefore a usurper in William's eyes. With that, the stage was set for a great clash between two of the strongest warlords of the era, right? Wrong, because there was a third claimant to the throne, a Norwegian man named Harald Hardrada, who was one of the descendants of the Viking king Canute the Great. Remember him? He also claimed that his family was promised the throne of England, so now there was 3 claimants to the English throne. Alright, that's going to be where I end it for this part, guys. I'm going to get into the actual battles in detail next time, so expect that video in the next few days or so. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, and if you wanted to add anything that you found interesting in the comments, be sure to do so, and I'll make sure to get back to you, as I would love to have some discussions with you guys about this stuff. Anyways, that's enough of me rambling, guys. Hope you have a good day, night, whatever time it is for you, and I'll be seeing you guys very soon for part 2. Thanks for watching.